A cry cut through the desert night. Thin, desperate, not from an adult but from something smaller. The rancher stepped off his porch barefoot, lantern shaking in his grip. In the dirt, she appeared, an Apache woman, stumbling, clutching two limp bundles against her chest. Her knees hit the ground. Dust rose. One child wheezed, the other barely stirred. "Please!" she rasped, eyes locking on his. The rancher froze. The shotgun slipped from his hand, hitting the porch with a hollow thud. Two starving infants, a mother at her end, and a man who hadn't touched another soul in months. What force had dragged her to his door, and what would it cost him to let her inside? From the beginning, the rancher did not move. Because of the wind from the desert, his ears were forced against, and it carried the roughness of her breath. As he held the lantern, it trembled, causing the light to be distributed unevenly around the yard. The lady made an effort to stand up, but her legs became unsteady. She pressed the infants closer, and the night was pierced by the faint screams of the infants. Inside, he murmured to himself, he was taken aback by his own sounds. Although she stumbled onward, her strength eventually gave out. In spite of the fact that she was made of bone and rags, he managed to catch her before she fell. The infants moaned, their little fists twitching in the air as they complained. Through the use of his shoulder, he pushed the door open. They were engulfed in darkness and the light of the fire by the cabin. With the children in her arms, the woman dropped herself on the floor near the fireplace. A pot was taken by him, and he poured the water that he had available. He then tore strips off an old shirt. In spite of the fact that he hadn't cared for anyone in years, his hands moved as if by instinct. While he was tilting water to her lips, he urged her to drink. She shook her head, and instead put it to the stomach of one of the infants. A feeble coughing sound was made by the kid, and drips spilled down its chin. It was a twist in the rancher's belly. As he crouched down, he was near enough to smell the sweat and dust that was on her skin. Where did it all go? His tone was more severe than he intended it to be. The eyes were raised by her, gloomy. It is hollow. There is no time. Although he was on the verge of asking more, the younger child sobbed, a sound that was so frail that it clawed at him. They were shocked by the woman, who seemed to be mumbling something in her tongue that was broken and low. A scratchy wool blanket that was worn thin was brought to him. When she placed the children down, she tucked them in with a caring that was so intense that it was on the verge of collapsing. With his hands hovering in a pointless manner, the rancher crouched down next to them. He was down on milk, nothing to take. In addition to water and grit, there was a fire that produced more smoke than it burned. Upon opening its eyes, one of the newborns revealed dark pools that were hazy with fatigue. It was a shallow jolt that caused the little chest to rise and fall. One of the ranchers took a deep breath. It was animals with stronger lungs that he had buried them. He turned his gaze to the woman, the phrase, "They won't last until dawn." As tears ran down her cheeks, she clinched her jaw and clenched her teeth. She moved closer, her whisper becoming more acerbic. "Then you are the one who makes them." He recoiled in response to her demand. "What the hell is going on?" Because of the baby's wheezing, he was cut short. Without giving it any thought, he stretched out and placed a finger to the chest of the infant on instinct. Although it was weak, the heartbeat was unyielding. He felt the woman's hand on his wrist. "They are saved by you." Her hold on him was shocking. She was not pleading. Rather, she was giving orders, as if a portion of her already knew that he was capable of doing it. He desired to dispute with her, to alienate her, and to assert that he was not a healer. However, the sight of that tiny chest rising, falling, and faltering served as a reassurance to him. Following the release of his wrist, the woman tightened the shawl that was wrapped over her shoulders. She did not speak while she stared into the flames, as if she were challenging him to disprove her assertions. The walls of the cabin made a creaking sound. The coyotes were seen scurrying across the ridge outside. Night exerted a greater and more intense pressure. To administer the remaining goat's milk to the infants, the rancher put it into a tin cup, dipped a rag into it, and then twisted droplets onto the infants' mouths. After coughing, one of them sucked weakly. One of them turned its head, but it sucked in a trace of the substance. A glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes like a ray of sunshine, although it was only for a brief time. The woman's gaze never ventured away from him. He was unable to read whatever that was contained within them, because of anything that caused his skin to itch. He turned his head to look at the children, whose lives were precarious and were hanging by the barest of threads. The reason that fate had brought them here was a mystery to him. However, he was aware of one thing. If they passed away in his home, he would never be able to sleep again. Through the manner in which the woman observed him, he was able to comprehend that she had no intention of allowing him to get away with it so easy. It was a hissing fire. There was a growing sense of night, and with each feeble breath that those infants took, the rancher felt the weight of a storm that he had not chosen to rest squarely on his chest, because it could mean more than just a matter of life and death to save them. It could require determining the reason why she had brought them here in the first place. Moreover, what was the secret that held them together in the shadows? Due of the weight that was pressing in, the cabin appeared to be too small. The infants whined in succession, with one of them rasping and the other attempting to cry hard. It seemed as though each breath they took could be their last, as their tiny chests rose and sank. The rancher remained still, moving back and forth between the fireplace and the bed, while his lantern created a shadow across the walls. There were foals that never made it until daylight, and he had witnessed calves that were born weak. On the other hand, never children. He came to a halt by the fire and murmured something under my breath. "Oh my God, it's all a lie." A sudden turn of the woman's head was seen. The word "quiet." He gave her a sneer, but the command that she was uttering stopped him in his tracks. She was not apologizing, rather she was protecting. He heard a dry, racking cough from the infant who was closest to him. With the care of a guy who was not accustomed to such tenderness, he knelt down and patted the newborn's back. The youngster jerked, and his eyes fluttered, but then he became still once more. Despite the fact that her hand was shaking, the woman reached out and touched the brow of the newborn. "I have a fever," she said. The rancher took his palm and placed it on the flesh, which was extremely hot. More loudly, he uttered the curse. The young lady's eyes pierced him like a torch. "That is a curse." A rigidity set in. "What did you swear at?" In order to assist, he desired to convey to her that he had never taken a vow of office, but her gaze caused him to get anchored, and the slightest hint of fear in her speech caused his wrath to transform into something else. He stood up, reached for a basin, and then returned with a rag. He then filled the basin with chilly water. He made an effort to keep his hands steady while he rubbed the infant's forehead. Despite the fact that the fever's heat had penetrated the fabric, he continued to wring and press, wringing and pressing, wringing and pressing. With phrases that were delicate and rhythmic, the woman whispered in Apache as if she were praying. She caught the rancher's eye briefly. "What exactly are you claiming?" She did not slow down. No translation was done. Only continued to sway ever so slightly, with the other child pressing against her chest. As the minutes passed, the only thing that could be heard was the rasp of faint breaths. The wall was being struck by a loud thump. The head of the rancher sprang up as he quickly froze. The woman's chant was abruptly cut off. They paid attention. "It's a shuffle." Then there was complete silence. Putting the bowl down, he reached for his shotgun and headed in the direction of the entrance. As he walked, the wood made a creaking sound. It was a woman who hissed, "No." As he eased the door open, he paid her no attention. Into the yard, the light from the lantern poured over. There was no movement other than the sound of dust falling across the ground. Now there was no longer any wind. As he stepped onto the porch, he raised his shotgun and began to search the shadows. The ridge was the source of a faint cry that could have been an animal, or something else entirely. The old pattern of violent behavior came racing back to him as he tightened his grip. The woman stood behind him and shouted out in a tone that was low but sharp, If you abandon them, they will perish." She was hunched over the infants, her body curved like a shield, and he turned around to see her. His sternum was clenched. After lowering the weapon, he re-entered the room and slammed the door shut behind him. While he was setting the weapon down, the woman's eyes met his once again. Despite the fact that they did not exchange any words, he had the impression that he had just made a decision based on something in her appearance. Once more, he squatted down next to the younger youngster, dipped the rag in the liquid and pressed it against the fevered skin. First, the infant wriggled and whined, and then it let out a soft cry. It was as if the sound was a salvation that broke through the silence. As she inhaled, the woman's shoulders began to drop. She continued to murmur in her tongue as she softly rocked the other youngster she was caring for. While he was seated back on his heels, the rancher gazed intently at the fire. However, he was unable to utter a single word. When he had finished, he mumbled, almost to himself, "Why me?" The inquiry was caught in the woman's eyes, and she flicked them up. She chose not to respond, however. The weight of her silence was greater than any words. On the outside, the night continued to grow longer. Once more, the cry from the ridge got closer, and this time it was more piercing, like if it were a warning. The rancher's skin was painfully itchy. Initially, he gazed at the door, and then he turned his attention back to the infants, whose frail breaths held him in place. However, the desert had not yet finished with them. Something was waiting for us outside. Looking over, furthermore, it was really a matter of time before it finally got closer. The infants cried once again, their screams being so weak that they hardly penetrated the walls of the cabin. Despite the fact that her lips were shaking, the woman muffled them by rocking softly and putting on an iron mask over her face. The rancher added another log to the fire that was already going. Sparks flew around and shadows stretched out across the open space. He was able to pick up every moan of the ceiling and every creak of the walls with his ears. Then it came back, this time getting closer. Outside there was a crunch in the soil, intended to be weighty. It is not an animal. He tensed up and cast a glance in the direction of the entrance. The mom, too, became frozen, her arms clenching more tightly around the children. "Preserve your silence," he mumbled. Taking the youngsters into her arms and hiding their faces in her shawl, she nodded and pulled them against her chest. To retrieve his shotgun, the rancher reached for it. It had a chilly and reassuring feel to it. As he approached the entrance, he listened intently. It's another step, then someone else. With a measured pace, whoever was out there desired to have their voice heard. His heartbeat was intense. Immediately after lowering the lantern, he snuffed it out with a swift gesture. The only thing that could be seen in the room was the dim orange light that emanated from the fire. In close proximity to the entrance, he clung to the wall with his back against it. There is no sound. Knuckles come next. 3 slams against the wood with great force. The woman jerked sharply. There was a quiet whine coming from one of the infants as they stirred. In Apache, she said something to it while pressing her palm against its mouth. Her breath was shaking. This time, the raps were more intense than before. The shotgun was raised by the rancher, with the barrel directed toward the entrance. It was his voice that pierced the darkness. "Who is among them?" There is no response. A very slight exhalation, such as the sound of breath fogging against the wood. His hold became very firm. There was a close call. Then, steps toward receding. The sun is setting and the night is coming. His heart was pounding, and every nerve in his body was strained to its limit as he waited. Even though his knuckles remained white, he finally brought the weapon down to his side. The silence was broken by the woman's timid murmur. "They pursued me," I said. He whirled around and stared at her. "Who is it?" Despite the anxiety that was underneath her, she maintained her steady focus on him. "Young men, and not yours. It is not mine. The hunters." As he dragged his hand down his face, he muttered an expletive under his breath. "And you were the one who brought them here." Her jaw was clamped tightly. "I had no other option." The infants whined once again, as if they were aware of the pressure that was being exerted on the space. She rocked them while humming low, almost as if she were protecting them from the darkness that was outside. The rancher continued to hold the shotgun in his hand while leaning on the table. He had a racing mind. Men would return to his territory if they were wandering around there. More robust, by means of fire or bullets. He turned his attention to the children, whose weak bodies were shaking as a result of the fever and hunger. If there was a fight, they would not be able to endure it. He let out a strong exhalation. "You have led me to the doorstep of peril. Does that make sense to you?" She raised her eyes in a violent manner. "I was the one who brought life. You are blind if you are unable to recognize the distinction between the two." The remark struck him more deeply than he had anticipated. He averted his gaze, his jaw fixed. The only sounds that could be heard were the crackling of the fire and the weak breaths of the infants. The hush had sunk in. After that, the smaller one began to stir. Through a feeble cough, its chest trembled. The small hand of the creature twitched as it reached upward and came into contact with the rancher's sleeve. His eyes were fixed on that delicate touch, and he froze. The woman's eyes became more gentle. "Since they choose you. It's not me. To you." Her remarks carried a significant amount of weight. He was at a loss for words, and the only thing he could feel was the empty echo of responsibility pushing down on his chest. On the outside, the wind in the desert altered. After yipping, a coyote became silent for a moment. The world waited with bated breath. After that, the rancher realized that this was not yet finished. If someone knocked, they would come back. And the next time, they would not abandon the situation. All three of his life were clinging to him inside the cabin, regardless of whether he wanted them or not. In addition, something was waiting in the shadows outside. There was no way to escape the night. It seemed to be a living thing, pressing on the cabin and talking through the holes in the walls. In their feverish dreams, the infants slept in fits, their breaths were short, and their little hands twitched at inappropriate times. At the table, the rancher sat with his shotgun positioned across his legs. Burning in his eyes, he refused to close them. His heart raced in response to every noise that came from the outside. In the same vein, the woman did not sleep. The children were draped in her shawl while she rested against the wall close to the fireplace, and her eyes were permanently focused on the entrance. She had refrained from requesting either food or water at any point. "There is only quiet. We are waiting." In the midst of the darkness, a sound could be heard. For this moment, there is no step. Voices. It was weak and low, and it was borne by the wind. The grip of the rancher became more firm. He got to his feet, walked up to the window and lifted the corner of the curtain using the cloth that was there. It flickers. Lamplight with a torch. Under his breath, he uttered a curse. The woman's hushed voice pierced the darkness. "How many are there?" his voice mumbled. "4. Then, after a brief pause, the speaker said, "Perhaps even more." Her pupils became more constricted. "None of them will leave." He then made a fast turn. "And what are your recommendations? I give you over to you. Watch as they set fire to my ranch." Her jaw became more rigid. Despite the fact that the baby's weight was pulling at her frail frame, she brought them up higher in her arms. "They were saved by you once. Now is not the time to stop." The words pierced him like a knife. He had the desire to refuse her, to force her out into the darkness, and to shut the door behind her. However, the torchlight from the outside began to approach, casting shadows that curved across the yard. Pulling back from the window, his breath was labored and ragged. As she slowly stood up, the woman had the infants in her arms. A firelight flicker could be seen in her eyes as she crossed over to him. She was close enough for him to see it. "You have fought in the past. I can notice it in you. Try it once more." Stumped, he stared at her in silence. "There is no appeal. Don't be afraid. It's just iron." In the open air, the stone was scuffed by the boots. A mocking laugh that was low in volume carried through the night. When the rancher felt the old muscle in his arms twitch, it was the muscle that remembered the weight of battle, of violence done and received. After the war, he had not fired a gun in anger for a long time. He vowed that he would never do it again. All the same, it was there. He gave the infants a quick glance. One of them moved their lips in a silent display of hunger. The fragile breaths that they took anchored him to the ground firmly. It was a forceful swallow. "If I engage in combat, they will come stronger. If I run, we won't manage to cover a mile." The voice of the woman was able to cut through the clutter. "As a result, you do not run. You are right." There was a prolonged pause. His own heartbeat was audible to him, and it was very loud in his ears. After that, there was yet another sound, as a whistle, precise. Its 3 notes, responded to by another individual located further away. They were encircling the cabin on all sides. The rancher's mouth became completely dry. With a step back, he braced himself for the shotgun. It appeared as though the woman's body alone could protect the infants, so she shifted them behind her. Sparks were thrown by the fire, which hissed for a brief moment. In the midst of the silence, the babies whimpered, the sound being too loud. The laughter ceased when they were outside. The footwear pressed in closer. As if it were being examined by a hand, the door shook. Keeping his gaze fixed on the wood, the rancher raised the gun, and every muscle in his body tensed up. When the woman spoke, her voice was so low that it was almost audible. "There is no one here to support me. They have come to support you." His head suddenly turned toward her, but before he could utter a word, the door shook violently as a result of a blow. It began to rain dust from the beams. The youngsters let out a scream. A halt occurred in the rancher's heart. The subsequent blow was more powerful. As a result, the latch broke. As his world came crashing down against that one wooden barrier, he braced himself with a shotgun steady, because in the event that it broke, everything else would also break. In response to the third blow, the door began to crack. The babies were shrieking now, their cries penetrating the night, and splinters were scattered across the floor from foot to foot. Keeping his shotgun steady, the rancher's muscles were tense and his breathing was measured. This was something he had experienced before. The battle was drawing near, and time seemed to be passing by in the blink of an eye. Putting the children against her chest, the woman whispered words that he did not comprehend, but that helped to stabilize the atmosphere in the room, as if it were a chant against fear. The door suddenly shattered open. When a figure entered the cabin, the light from the torch cast a shadow that was crooked across the space. There was a swirling of dust. The intruder's eyes looked at the rancher with a widening that lasted for a fraction of a second. "Cole." The rancher held his shotgun in the air while he froze, and that voice, he was aware of it. Despite the fact that he was covered in dirt and alcohol, the man took a step forward and smiled. "It is you, without a doubt. I had the impression that you had passed away." His jaw was clenched tightly. His name had not been mentioned in this location for many years. The woman's eyes darted between them, analyzing each one in a discerning manner. A torch flickered in the air as the man spread his arms out. "Didn't expect to find you playing nursemaid to squaws and their brats," he commented with a laugh that sounded like metal scraping against metal. "The times must be difficult." When Cole's finger pressed against the trigger, it itched. "Get out of here." His head was tilted to the side. "Oh, what is it? Are you going to murder an old friend?" Additional shadows appeared from behind him. The firelight outside casts shadows on the shapes. The guns shone brightly as the boots shuffled. Outside of the cabin, there were no strangers in the area. Those men who had ridden with him in the past surrounded it on all sides. "You are familiar with them," the woman murmured. Cole chose not to respond. Just his silence was sufficient. The grin on the man's face arose. "There you have it. We go back a very long way." He pointed his finger in the direction of the children and said, "And we know what you owe. They have no business being here. Transmit them to me. You don't need any blood." Cole's grip became more firm. Memories emerged from the shadows, including faces he had buried, debts that he had not paid, and the taste of violence that had followed him long after he had publicly vowed to abstain from it. The woman moved forward and positioned herself in a position where she was between the men and the infants. Her tone was as metallic as steel. "They will pass away before you even touch them." There was a halt in the room. At the intensity of her voice, even Cole was unable to catch his breath. After blinking, the man burst out laughing even more. The word "feisty," "You made a terrible choice in choosing a houseguest for yourself, Cole." There was a second voice coming from the outside. "Why is there such a delay? If you absolutely must, set it on fire." The man's smirk became less stable. Uneasy, he cast a glance in the opposite direction. The other people were more irritable and cruel than he was. That moment of uncertainty was caught by Cole, and he took possession of it, a steady shotgun in his hand. His voice low and menacing, he took a step forward. "If you happen to cross this threshold once more, you won't be able to walk back out." The individual vacillated. It was the first time that his smile had failed him. As he looked into Cole's eyes, he detected something in them that caused him to hesitate. Outside, a second torch came close to the scene. On the wooden frame, heat was applied to the surface. The woman clenched her fists around the infants even more tightly, and murmured something in her tongue, as if her words could construct barriers against the flames. His heart was beating rapidly. There was a fire on the way. They were waiting for the men. His history had tracked him down, and it demanded that he make amends. This cabin would either remain standing or be reduced to ashes with all of them inside, depending on the next move that was made. A whiff of smoke made its way into the cabin just before the flames appeared. Under the doorframe, it was acrid, biting and curled up like a warning notice. The infants writhed and coughed feebly, their lungs being too small and fragile to withstand what was about to happen. Cole became tense in his stomach. He gave the woman a quick glance. By the time she was holding her children, her knuckles had turned white. But her eyes remained steady. She did not inquire about it. Not once did she beg. The only thing she did was wait to see if the man she had put her faith in to protect their lives would fail. Voices could be heard coming from outside. Burn it off. Smoke them both out. After that, there was a cruel and eager laughter. He moved very quickly. The water was sprayed across the doorframe as he dragged a bucket to the fireplace, filled it, and then dropped it. There was a hissing sound coming from the steam. It wouldn't last for very long. The voice of the woman, which was sharp but quiet, said, "We can't stay." He turned his back on her. "Where are you going? Where do they hold you?" She made a steely response to his rage. "Moving ahead is preferable to burning." Those words pierced him to the core. She was absolutely correct, but because they were running, they had to cross open ground while carrying their infants, and there were men waiting with rifles. This is yet another collision with the wall. Sparks began to appear. As the fire spread outside, it began to lick the wood. The pounding of Cole's heart was audible. It was the part of his life that he had buried, the fighter and the survivor, that was pressing down on him. He sensed it rousing itself from the ashes and clawing its way up. A second bucket was grabbed by him, and he poured water into another corner before slamming it down. The phrase, "If we run, we do it smart." An adjustment was made to the shawl, and the woman pressed both of the children against her chest. Her eyes were unblinking and her face was intricately carved in shadow. "Tell it to me." Cole walked to the back of the cabin and yanked a board that was loose from its position. There was a crawl space beneath it, which was an old escape from the days when raids were more common. It is the path that leads to the creek bed. It is obscured by brush. Following her gaze, she gave a single nod. "Do not be hesitant." Boots made a thudding sound outside. A torch slammed into the window, causing the glass to shatter at the impact. A fire broke out, catching the edge of the curtain as it traveled by. It was snatched away by Cole, who then stamped it out. With his jaw clenched, he turned his attention to her. "Let's go, right now." However, she took no action. Her eyes were drawn to his face as she stared at him. "And what about you?" His grip on the shotgun was firm. "I'll buy you some time." When she saw his eyes, her lips parted, and she began to express her disapproval. Chilly, to be sure. While she prayed over the infants, she lowered her head and whispered the words. After that, she slipped into the crawl space and vanished into the darkness with no trace. Additionally, another torch smashed against the siding of the cabin, causing it to roar. There was a ravenous crawling of flames across the wood. Cole refocused his attention on the entrance. His hands remained steady on the gun as he heaved into his chest. Within the doorway, there was a shadow. There was a barking sound. One last opportunity. "Cole, deliver them to me." Cole opened fire with the shotgun. The sound of his voice was akin to gravel. "Come and obtain them." The entire world came to a standstill. The door suddenly opened wide, and the light from the fire began to flood in. While holding his torch high, the first cowboy charged through the doorway. Cole was terminated. As the explosion illuminated the room with a brightness that exceeded that of the flames, the man collapsed, and the torch clattered across the floor. Behind him, a second shadow appeared out of nowhere. The butt of the shotgun was swung by Cole with such force that it cracked bone. Groaning, the man fell to the ground. The inside, there he is, remaining. A resounding voice could be heard coming from the exterior. A loud rumble could be heard on the porch. His chest heaved in response. After pumping the shotgun, he chambered another round of ammunition. It was too well that his hands remembered. It was only when the war slept that it left a man behind. A rifle barrel was pushed through the window of the room. Cole lowered himself to the ground as a shot shattered, causing splinters to explode above his head. He turned around and fired his weapon through the glass. Into the darkness, a scream could be heard. It became more dense. The ceiling beams were warmed by the flames. As a result of the weight of the fire, the cabin groaned. As additional shots ripped through the walls, he moved quickly and crouching behind the table, which he had turned over in order to take cover. A group of men yelled outside, "Toss it in the fire, it's impossible for him to survive." But they were unaware of it. It had been worse than Cole had endured. His eyes were searching as he crouched low. It was almost empty in his shotgun. He reached for the pistol that was mounted on his belt. It was rusty but dependable. As his thumb came into contact with the grip, memories flooded back to him. The battlefield, the screams, and the bodies that had been left behind. Never again, he vowed to himself. This is where he was. Another figure appeared in the shadows next to the doorframe, raising their revolver. Before the man could even blink, Cole fired his weapon. It was then that the intruder fell backwards and rolled off the porch. The yells then turned into curses. After a moment of hesitation, the group's self-assurance was shaken. An individual yelled out, "Damn him, he's still a killer." As Cole leaned against the wall, his sweat and soot began to mix together. His lungs were on fire. However, the sharpness of his eyes did not change. There was complete silence for a length of time. Nothing but the sound of fire crackling filled the air. After that, there was yet another sound, a cry from a baby. It was muffled and faint, but it was carried on the mist. His blood became ice cold. In the direction of the crawl space, his head snapped. This woman had not traveled very far. The scream cut through the darkness. Outside, the cowboys were also able to hear it. That's it. Placed behind the cabin. As the boots pounded toward the back, torches were swung around. Colleen's heart was pounding. He ran across the room that was on fire, ducking under the smoke and leaping over boards that had fallen around him. He sprinted out of the back door and into the night air, leaving a trail of exhaustion behind him. The creek bed was in front of them, with the brush shaking in the area where the woman had hidden. However, the cowboys were drawing nearer with their rifles raised and their torches blazing. It was with clenched teeth that Cole lifted his pistol. He wouldn't allow them to get close to her, while he was still breathing. There was a commotion in the night, with shouts and gunfire. His entire being was consumed by the night. Burning smoke emanated from the cabin, causing the sky to take on a mutable orange hue. As the woman and her children hid in the brush, the torchlight shot across the yard like a swarm of enraged fireflies, getting closer and closer to the area. Cole dove low, his pistol raised, his eyes focusing intently. While he was running toward the creek bed, the dry earth was crunching under his boots. There was a shot fired. His heels were being kicked by dirt. A second bullet whizzed by his ear. Another one. As rounds tore into the wood, he dove behind a trough, which caused the wood to splinter. In the back of the barn, a voice yelled out. The chest of Cole heaved, and his eyes were burning from the smoke and sweat. He took a quick glance over the trough and saw 4 men moving forward with rifles in one hand and torches in the other. They were twisted with rage and drink, and their faces flickered with the light of the fire. A baby whimpered once more as it emerged from the brush. The material is too soft to travel very far, but it is sufficient. The sound drew the cowboys' attention to themselves. The pounding of Cole's heart was audible. He was unable to allow them to get to her. He took a deep breath, steadied his pistol, and then fired. One of the torch's holders was knocked down. The line was broken by chaos. While they were dispersed, the others yelled curses. There were cracks in the gunfire. As bullets struck stone, Cole rolled around, avoiding sparks as they hit. Each shot he fired was deliberate as he returned fire. After years of fighting, his hand became more skilled. Despite the fact that his soul recoiled with each pull of the trigger, at least 2 men fell. 1/3 of the group ran back toward the porch while yelling commands, failed to catch him, protect her from him at all costs. He did not wait for it. He broke his cover and ran in a low-speed direction toward the creek bed. As the bullets pursued him, some of them came so close that he could feel the air shifting. The dust began to rise as he slid down the bank. While she was crouching among the brush, Children were clinging to her tightly, and her face was covered in ash and fear. His eyes were fixed on hers. "Get moving right away!" he yelled out. Even though tears were burning her cheeks, she maintained her composure and shook her head. "They will observe us. You are able to evade them." The chest of Cole was clenched. The idea of distancing himself from her pinned him down like a knife. Nevertheless, the torches moved in closer. She was absolutely correct. He compelled himself to give a slight nod. "Keep your head down. You must not make any noise." Over the course of one raw heartbeat, her eyes held his. First, she knelt down over her children, protecting them with her body as she did so. Cole retraced his steps and climbed the bank while holding his pistol. He fired into the darkness, and the cowboy's rage was directed toward him as a result of his shots. "It's over there, down by the creek." The light from the fire rotated. Torches rushed in his direction. Cole reloaded his weapon while his hands were shaking as he ducked behind a boulder. His ammunition was being depleted. With 3 shots remaining, he counted. It was a forceful swallow. "It would appear that this is sufficient." The crackling of the flames became more audible. Behind them, his cabin was on fire, and the roof collapsed with a roar as it collapsed. The night was filled with sparks that were like stars that were on fire. Cole was able to see them in their light. They were a half-dozen silhouettes with rifles leveled down and getting closer. He clenched his teeth, raised his pistol, and stood confidently in his position. It would be necessary for them to shed blood in order to obtain him. The bullet from the first rifle shattered as it struck the boulder, which was only a few inches away from Cole's head. As his lungs burned, he ducked his head and kept his grip on the pistol. Once more, a shot. One more spark here. There was a tightening of the circle among the men. Cole then fired once while leaning out. A man stumbled. His torch was falling to the ground and the flame was sputtering in the dirt. After shifting, Cole fired once more. One more cowboy toppled over while clutching his shoulder. As for the others, they did not falter. Widening their stance, they drew closer to him. Cole's jaw became more tense. Only 2 bullets remain. A total of over half a dozen rifles were pointed in his direction. While he was assessing his chances, he squatted down. His chest rumbled furiously. It was possible for him to buy them some time, perhaps even enough for her to run deeper into the trees, but it would be the end of everything for him. The thought adhered to my mind like a knife. For years, he had lived by himself, and he was already half dead. It's possible that this was how it came to an end. Then, there was motion behind him. A shadow emerged from the bottom of the creek. It is the woman. During the night, she was holding a fallen torch in one hand, and the flames of the torch hissed as they licked the air. The other hand she used was holding a blade that was long and thin, and it glowed like a shard of moonlight. Cole's eyes grew more wide. "Get back," he hissed angrily. However, she did not. The steps she took were silent, and her eyes were stern as she moved with sudden precision. A single cowboy was completely unaware of her approach. She moved behind him and slammed her torch into his back as she did so. He let out a scream as he stumbled forward into the rough ground. After that, the blade moved quickly and sank to a grave. Cole's breath was taken away. She didn't show any timidity. The woman did not falter. The way she fought was as if she had spent her entire life preparing for this particular evening. The group let out a roar of rage. "She is no longer here. Obtain her." The light from the torches lit up her face, illuminating the determination that was on her face. While firing his final 2 bullets, Cole jumped to his feet and fired them. A man whirled around and fell to the ground, while another man screamed as lead tore through his leg. "It is empty." Cole threw the pistol away and grabbed the nearest branch that was thick enough to be used as a club on the spot itself. However, his eyes burned with a new fire, while his knuckles were bleeding. During the cracking of a rifle, the woman ducked, rolling low and slicing her blade upward towards the sky. They sprayed blood. Another man was injured. Shouts, screams, and the crackling of fire could be heard echoing through the creek bed. Just for a moment, Cole did nothing but stare. In no way was she a helpless widow. She was a fierce warrior who kept her temper in check and simply waited for the right moment to strike. However, the cowboys had not yet been exhausted. Fear was replaced by rage as more people rushed in. While exposing his teeth, Cole raised the branch. During his swing, a sickening crack could be heard as the wood smashed against a jaw. The knife flashed as another man lunged forward. Cole wrestled with him, putting his strength against his desperation as they wrestled in the dust. At his side, the woman fought with her blade flashing and her torch hitting the ground. They worked together to turn the creek bed a red color. Despite this, the gang continued to move closer. At the same time that one person fell, another one moved forward, and the fire that was coming from the cabin lit up the sky, which attracted more eyes and increased the risk. His chest heaved in response. It hurt in his arms. The shawl that the woman was wearing was stained with blood that did not belong to them. The children whimpered from the top of the brush, sounds that were so fragile that they cut through the storm. Then there are hooves. The noise became audible throughout the night. Weighty, numerous. The cowboys came to a complete stop, their eyes darting toward the ridge. Likewise, Cole turned around, his vision being irritated by sweat and soot. Those who ride. There are silhouettes moving up the hill, dozens of them. They were holding torches that were swaying. It's not cowboys, it's Apache. The atmosphere changed, and it became heavy with a new kind of threat. The sound of hooves crashing down the ridge was indistinguishable from the sound of a storm breaking the night. As the smoke filled the air, silhouettes of torches could be seen rising into the sky. Bows were drawn and rifles shone brightly in the light of the fire as men arose from their saddles. The cowboys became completely frozen. In a single heartbeat, their bravado was completely depleted. "The Apache," one hissed, their voice shaking slightly. With a tighter grip, Cole encircled the branch that was covered in blood. While his eyes darted from the riders to the woman who was standing by his side, his chest heaved. Her blade was dripping, and her torch was swaying in the wind as she stood her ground. This appeared to be the moment that she had been anticipating, as evidenced by the squareness of her shoulders. The rider who was in the lead made a charge down the slope. It was the glow of the burning cabin that caught his face, which was as hard as stone. He fixed his gaze on Cole, then moved it to the woman, and finally to the infants that were concealed in the brush. The cowboys became extremely anxious. One ran after his horse in a hurry. He felt a whistle from an arrow, which struck him in the back. The torch was extinguished as he fell face first into the dirt around him. The rest of the people retreated, their rifles shaking. He stutteringly said, "What? We didn't know." But his voice broke under the pressure of the silence that surrounded him. Cole's heartbeat was pounding. He experienced a tremor in the ground beneath the riders. One time, he had engaged in combat with them. The number of memories that he had buried was incalculable. And now here they were, encircling him with their eyes blazing with the fire of recognition and suspicion. Taking a step forward was the woman. In spite of the smoke, her voice was audible. "My children were taken away by them." As she moved her hand steadily toward Cole, she pointed to him and said, "This man, he stood between us and death." Her words lingered in the air, caught between the blazing fire and the utter silence. In the ash-strewn ground, the Apache leader dismounted, and his boots continued to sink into the ground. Every step he took was deliberate, and his hand was never far from his weapon as he walked slowly and deliberately. With eyes as hard as a rock, he came to a stop in front of Cole. His voice was low and steady as he said, "You fought them, but you are not a member of our group." The chest tightened as Cole straightened up. "No, I'm not," he admitted, his voice being firm. "However, I was not going to stand by and watch them burn her alive, as well as those children." There was no change in the leader's expression. Between them, the smell of blood and smoke was thick, and the flames crackled against each other. When they reached the clearing, additional Apache riders descended from the ridge and encircled it. Fear was written all over the faces of the cowboys as they dropped their weapons one by one as they were now surrounded. At long last, the leader turned his gaze to the woman. "Why are you coming here? Why send them to a person you do not know?" Unflinching, she maintained her gaze on him. The slightest crack appeared in her voice as she explained, "Because no one else would open their door. It was because I had no other option." There was a prolonged pause. Sparks began to fly upward into the sky as the wind shifted. Slowly, The leader began to exhale. You are the one who lives tonight. Owing to the fact that he chose to fight on your side. Cole clenched his jaw, and a sense of relief washed over him. However, this feeling was only fleeting. Since the leader had not yet completed their task, his voice became softer and his eyes narrowed. The decision regarding whether or not he is a member of the living will be made tomorrow. The words cut like a knife through the air. Cole's breath was taken away. At that moment, the woman's hold on her children became more firm. The cowboys, who were pale and shaking, looked at each other in a frantic manner. Behind them, the fire roared, finally consuming the remaining portion of the cabin. And the night, in its glow, promised that there would be more blood to come. In the beginning, they bound the cowboys. With their mouths gagged and their eyes wide with drunken fear, they were finally brought to their senses by the sight of Apache blades at their throats. Rope was bit into their wrists, their horses were taken away, their weapons were taken away, and the people who survived were brought down to their knees in the dirt. The woman was standing by his side, her children clinging to her skirts, and Cole stood apart from her with his shoulders squared. Under the light of the raging ruins, the Apache leader, who was tall and scarred and had his hair tightly braided, presented himself to him. The leader uttered the words, "You have blood on your hands," in Apache, and then repeated them in a halting English sentence, his voice being harsh. "Our blood," she said. "People of white ancestry, both are carried by you." Cole took a swallow. The mere fact that he was holding the branch caused his knuckles to hurt, but it was nothing in comparison to the pressure that their eyes were exerting on him. Neither of them denied it. His voice was gravelly as he said, "I do." War left me with no other option. It was impossible to miss the leader's gaze. As soon as he raised his hand, two warriors came forward and dragged one of the cowboys who was bound into the circle of firelight. Behind his gag, the man whimpered, his knees sinking into ash as he did so. The leader responded by saying, "You say you fought for her. Make it clear that you are not the same as them. Put an end to him." Cole's stomach was left in a knot as the words landed heavily. While the cowboy thrashed, his screams were muffled and spilled out into the smoke. Cole's heart was pounding, and he could feel the stirring of long-forgotten ghosts, the battlefield, the dead bodies, and the hollow eyes of young men who should not have died. He had made a solemn vow that he would never kill again unless it was absolutely necessary. He was able to hear the woman's voice through the storm. Her eyes, which were steady despite her exhaustion, burned into him as she said, "Don't. You've accomplished enough." She was abruptly turned against by the leader. Although she said, "Silence," she did not bow her head. The chest of Cole lifted and lowered. He allowed the branch to fall, causing it to splinter on the ground. The tone of his voice was hoarse but firm as he stated, "I am not your executioner. The innocent will be protected by me. If you intend to bring war to me, I will fight. Still, I will not kill a man who is bound. Certainly, that is not fair." All of the warriors became rigid. Throughout the circle, murmurs could be heard. While some grimaced and nodded, others scowled. His eyes narrowed as he continued to observe him for a considerable amount of time. It was then that he slowly signaled. The cowboy was struck across the throat by a warrior who drew his blade. While the man was slumped over, the blood that had darkened the dirt was caught by the torchlight. Suddenly the woman jerked back, bringing her children closer to her. A mixture of rage and revulsion began to twist inside Cole, causing his jaw to tighten. "You refused," the leader stated in a direct manner. "Despite this, you did not flee." The silence continues. The fire that was behind them began to crack, and beams began to collapse, resonating like distant drums. After what seemed like an eternity, the leader moved closer, getting so close that Cole could smell the smoke that was clinging to his hair. "You might be able to live," he said. "However, your life is not wholly yours. When we call, you will answer the phone. Whenever we ask you to, you will bleed. You, rancher, are caught between two different worlds. Not only that, but do not fail again." Cole's throat became more constricted. One nod was all that he gave. "And I make sense of it." While mounting his horse with the grace of command, the leader turned his back on the follower. Because he raised his hand, the riders started moving, and they dragged the remaining cowboys into the darkness like cattle that were going to be slaughtered. The woman reached out and touched Cole's arm, her fingers shaking slightly. "If you had killed him, you would have been able to save yourself." He shook his head and spoke in a low tone. "In that case, I would have lost more than just my life." The night became subdued. As the fire burned out, the only sounds that remained were the crackling of the fire and the gentle, fragile breathing of the children who were pressed against their mother's chest. Cole was aware that his reckoning was not yet complete. He had been spared by the Apache, but the burden of survival had just begun to weigh heavily on him. The dawn slowly made its way across the desert, casting a grey light over the ashes that were left behind by Cole's cabin. Over the charred timbers, the smoke had become more ethereal, curling back and forth like pale ghosts. As everyone waited, the world fell silent. Although his shoulders were heavy, Cole stood at the edge of the ruin with his eyes fixed on the horizon. While the woman knelt down close to the creek, her children were huddled together under a ragged blanket. Using movements that were gentle but unyielding, she washed the soot from their faces. Her movements were similar to those of someone who had carried sorrow throughout her entire life. Cole's throat became more constricted. He was familiar with her fight, having witnessed her stare death in the eye. Nevertheless, there she was, hushedly speaking to her children in order to soothe them, her strength less pronounced but no less fierce. In the end, she stood up. Across the ruined clearing, she met his gaze and looked at him. Something that couldn't be read flashed in her eyes. Perhaps it was gratitude, but it could also be fear. It was his boots that crunched on the ash as he approached her. It was a soft voice that said, "You never told me." Her head was tilted sideways. "What did I tell you? Because you weren't the only one. The fact that you had children." Her lips were pressed together tightly. She said nothing for a considerable amount of time. Then she took a deep breath in and out. "Due to the fact that they are not mine." Cole went completely numb. With a sharper edge than any blade, the words shattered the silence. When she looked back at him, she briefly glanced at the children. Although she spoke in a low, steady tone, her voice was shaking with the weight of the truth. "They are the property of my sister. The previous winter, she was murdered. The men who came to get us tonight were the same individuals who were responsible for her death. I vowed that I would bring up her children as if they were my own." His chest heaved in response. When he looked at the children, he saw that they were frail and thin, with eyes that were wide with innocent hunger. In the midst of the storm that was raging around them, they clung to her skirts. His words were, "You carried this by yourself." When she said, "I had no choice," her voice broke. "They would not be taken by anyone, not my people, and not yours either. I am the only one, and I was unable to provide them with food. For this reason, I came to talk to you." He was struck by the truth more forcefully than any bullet. Not only had she brought desperation, but she had also brought a legacy of blood, and she had expected nothing in return other than the opportunity to keep her promise. When he looked into her eyes, he saw not just a warrior, not just a mother by proxy, but a woman who was carrying the unbearable weight of two worlds. This was the first time he had seen her since the night had begun. The youngsters began to stir. There was a single word that was whispered by one of them as they looked up at Cole, the word father. Despite the fact that it came out so innocently and without knowledge, it hit him like a hammer. His breathing became labored. His eyes were crimson. His jaw was clenched as he turned his back on the Apache riders and stared at the horizon, where they had disappeared several hours earlier. The words of their caution continued to reverberate in his ears. "You stand between two worlds. This time, you must not fail either." The hands of Cole were shaking. Years ago, he had buried his heart, making a solemn vow that he would never care again. Nevertheless, they had dug it up here and now. He heard the woman's voice, which was gentle but authoritative. "You won't be asked to keep us, Istun," I said. "I will carry them until I fall if you decide to turn us away at this moment. However, if you open your door," her eyes sparkled with tears that had not yet been shed, "they will call you father regardless of whether you want them to or not." There was a heavy weight to the words in the morning air. Cole felt a rumble in his chest. Not with hooves, not with war, but with something more dangerous, belonging. He felt the ground shift beneath him. He was not aware of the impending danger. Once more he turned his gaze to the children, towards her, amidst the destruction of the life he had believed he desired. In addition, he had the realization that he was not afraid of the burden for the very first time. He was concerned that he would lose it. He moved closer, his voice becoming more abrasive. "They should refer to me as father," I said. Suddenly, the woman's breath stopped, in spite of the fact that her shoulders sagged in relief. Her eyes continued to sparkle with cautiousness. "It won't be simple at all. Once more, they will appear, each and every side." He responded, "I am aware." Even though his chest felt lighter, his gaze became more resolute. "They will discover that I am prepared." Last but not least, the sun broke through the horizon behind them, painting a fiery picture across the desert sky. It burned in the same way that his determination did now. It was alive, fierce, and unyielding. Cole was aware that he had made the decision to not only survive, but to live again as the children reached for his hands, clinging to him in a way that was both small and fragile. All of his possessions had been taken away by the desert. At this point, contrary to all expectations, it had returned something. However, smoke could be seen rising from another camp further beyond the ridge. The riders had already begun to move. As the dawn broke, war was never far behind, just like the dawn. Once more, the desert was uninhabited. There was smoke drifting into the pale morning sky, and the cabin had been reduced to charred bones on the inside. However, even in the midst of the destruction, there was life. Small fingers gripped Cole's hands with a trust that neither of the children knew he could still earn. The children clung to Cole's hands. As she stood close to him, the Apache woman's shawl was torn, and her eyes were hollow from exhaustion. Nevertheless, there was a consistency that remained in her stance. She was confronted with death, but she chose to live. In the face of hopelessness, she made the decision to make a promise. Cole turned his gaze first to her, and then to the horizon, where the Apache war party had vanished beyond the horizon. He was well aware that their words would permanently follow him. He would never be able to fully belong to either world, nor would he ever be able to escape the judgment of either. However, when the youngest child tugged at his sleeve and whispered the same word for the first time, "Father," Cole understood something more profound. The concept of belonging was not based on blood. It was forged in the moments when a man made the decision to stand rather than run, and it was forged in the choice that he made. A long time ago, he had laid his heart to rest in graves that had been dug for men and dreams. It began to beat once more now, amidst the ashes of his past. Low and steady was the tone of the woman's voice. "They will return at a later time." His head nodded. His jaw became more tense. "Just then you should allow them to come. This time around I won't be by myself." A stirring wind blew through the desert, carrying with it ash and hope in equal measure. After what seemed like years, Cole finally experienced a relief from the burden of silence, because he was no longer fighting it alone, rather than because the land had become more benevolent, which it never would have been. The children were huddled together, vulnerable but fierce in their determination to survive. As she stood by his side, the woman's blade remained sheathed but was never too far away. They were not a family by blood, but rather by choice when they were together. Moreover, strength was found in that decision. Cole turned his attention to the cabin that was still standing. He was going to rebuild. The walls, as well as his life, were the walls. Not only for himself, but also for those who now looked to him with the unwavering trust of those who were innocent. Blood was a requirement for survival in the desert for all those who lived there. Cole, however, came to the realization that it did, on occasion, return something. On this occasion, it had provided him with something that was worth shedding blood for. This tale of survival, self-sacrifice, and having an unexpected sense of belonging comes to an end. If you were in Cole's position, what actions would you have taken? Would you have opened your door or would you have turned away? If you were moved by this story, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and come back for the next one, which will feature fate, bravery, and history coming together once more. Until then, may your way be reliable, and may the decisions you make be courageous.